Chris, welcome to Climate Matters. You have written a fascinating book. For the benefit of our audience, what's it called and why did you write it?
It's called The Plastics Paradox, and I wrote it because one day my kids came home from school. I have two daughters, and they came home and they've been taught things which I knew as a scientist were just lies. And I found that to be unacceptable. And then I realized, well, where do teachers get their information from? They're just human beings like the rest of us. They pick things up from the press, and they don't really have a source of credible information. So that's where my quest began, was to spend a year reading hundreds of scientific articles to get the facts and then present them for the teachers, which I actually did yesterday. I presented at the elementary school yesterday for the teachers and the kids.
Well, let's come to the reaction of that in a moment. But first of all, I want to establish your credentials. You're not just a scientist. You're a scientist that specialized in plastics for decades. So you know the plastics sector inside and out. Tell me a little bit about your academic credentials and your experience working with plastics.
Sure. Well, I became fascinated with plastics when I was studying my degree in chemistry in England. And a professor came to me and said, Professor Norman Billingham, who's a very famous polymer scientist, and he said, you should study plastics because there's a lot of demand and not much supply of experts. So that's where my career as a plastic scientist began. And I've been in Germany and Sweden, America. I've traveled all around the world, always as a plastic scientist. So I don't make or sell or market plastics. I'm dealing with the technical aspects only of plastics.
At the time that you entered the plastics sector, it wasn't viewed the way that it is right now. Right now, it's almost as though you say plastic and people go, oh, no, not plastic. We have to get rid of plastics. But to get rid of plastics would be catastrophic as far as our modern way of life, would it not?
That's right, and that's really what the paradox is about. We know that paradox is where you have contradictory information. So the paradox is that we know we need plastics. We really can't live today's society and the way that we live today. We can't maintain that without plastics. And on the other hand, we're told that they're bad. So which one is it? They can't both really be true. They can't be good and bad at the same time. So the plastics paradox was to set about answering that question. Are plastics good or bad? What do we really know? Well,
are they good or bad?
They're good. If you look at all the science, they're good, and it's unequivocal. There's no way to argue with that. If you look at if the facts are what's important to you, there's no way to argue against it.
Well, what makes plastics good?
So the only way to know if something is green or not is to do a life cycle analysis, which is a lot of work, right? So LCA for short. This is what I taught the kids yesterday. You look at what are the raw materials needed to make your plastic or wood or whatever else you're making. What are the raw materials? What's the manufacturing process? What kind of logistics are involved? Is it transported by plane or by train or by bus? How much gasoline goes into that? You look at the carbon dioxide emissions. You look at all the chemicals used. You even look at loss of life. Are people dying making this product? You add it all up and you work out how green is this material. And by using this method, which governments use it, Greenpeace uses it, it's the only accepted method in the world. By adding all these things up, you can compare wood and metal and glass and plastic and work out which is the greenest solution. And that's what people have done.
So as a drinking container, let's say, which is, has been pointed out to me as one of the leading causes of plastic garbage, more than almost anything else, especially when you look in developing countries around the world where they don't have access to clean water, they're getting bottled plastic water. And we see these piles of garbage. Are you saying that even that is better than the alternative?
I would say a lot of plastic bottles are not needed in the first place. So I'm not one to say that we should all be buying plastic bottles. My children at school learn needs versus wants, right? You need a glass of water, but you want a bottle of pop, right? You don't need the soda and you don't need the bottle either. So I would say a lot of this is to do with not taking things you don't need in the first place. But if you do need something, often you need, like you said, sanitary water in an area. So should it be in paper or should it be in plastic? When you do the life cycle analysis, comparing those, if you compare plastic bottle to a glass bottle to an aluminum can, the PET bottle wins every time, and it's by a wide margin.
Can you define PET bottle? I know that I read it in your book.
Yeah, so like a regular soda bottle that you see, like a Coke bottle or a bottle of water that you buy in the supermarket, that's a PET bottle. made of polyethylene terephthalate. That's the proper name, but that's too long for people to say and impossible to spell. So people call it PET instead.
So when you buy that bottle versus a glass bottle, what does the life cycle analysis say of that plastic bottle for, a bottle of soda?
Well, I have information in my book with the exact numbers, so I would refer to people to the book or my website for exact numbers. But basically, if you're going from a plastic bottle to an aluminium can, you might be using double the energy, creating double the waste, and double the CO2 as well for global warming. If you look at glass, it's much worse. Glass creates a huge amount more waste. And people will, of course, tell you glass is recyclable. But even if you're a kid, you can realize to recycle glass, you have to heat it up. It's like molten lava, right? You have to heat it up to thousands of degrees to melt glass and recycle it. To melt plastics, you only need a couple hundred degrees. So that's one of the main reasons why glass is greener. You can process it at much lower temperatures than you can metal.
You mean plastic is greener? You just said glass is greener.
Yeah, sorry. Plastic is greener because it processes at a couple hundred degrees, whereas metal and glass, you need much higher temperatures to melt them. So that's a contributing factor.
Okay, but when I use post-consumer glass versus post-consumer plastic, is it not easier to have a blend of post-consumer glass than it is post-consumer plastic?
I think that's probably true. It's probably easier, but it's not green. So there are two things here, right? People are saying what is easiest and what is actually green. We should first look at what's green. That's what I do in the book. I look first at what is the science, what do we know is greenest, and then how do we make sure that we use that material. Today, we're doing it the other way around. We're saying we collect and recycle glass and aluminum, and therefore we should use that. And you're like, well, no, we shouldn't be encouraging the use of less green materials just because we're used to recycling them. That's doing things exactly backwards, in my opinion.
In your book, you talk about the example in Sweden where they started to say, okay, well, we're going to gather up glass from everywhere and we're recycling it. Look at how good we are. And you started to do this life cycle analysis of recycling glass in Sweden. What did you find?
That was actually the first time I heard about life cycle analysis back in the 90s. A friend of mine called Bengt, who worked for a big pharmaceutical company, told me that when you do the life cycle analysis, you're better off going to the beach and getting fresh sand and making glass that way. Because in Sweden, they collect all the glass together, they truck it to Norway, where they then melt it at thousands of degrees, and then send it back again. And by the time you've put in all those trucking costs and all of the melting and everything, it's just not friendly to collect glass and recycle it. So everyone in Sweden was feeling great that they were really ahead of the curve and they're doing the right thing for the environment. But in reality, they were harming the environment by not doing the greenest thing. And that's why life cycle analysis is so important. If you don't start off with the facts, you end up harming the environment instead of helping it.
Is that your big concern, that people are making decisions that are ill-informed, and in doing so, they're actually harming the very environment that they're seeking to protect?
That's the irony. The people who care the most are doing the most harm because they're really vociferous. They're out there voting, they're asking for change, they're shouting at the top of their lungs, and they're demanding the wrong things. The people who really care are demanding changes which are certain to harm the environment. There's absolutely no question. And politicians are listening, companies are listening, and we're harming the environment because no one spent the time to go get the facts.
Well, right now here in Vancouver, there's been a tremendous amount of focus on single-use plastics, namely drinking straws. And they're banning them, but they're being replaced by paper straws, which I find are challenging because it's hard to get through one drink and have the straw survive.
I know, I'm totally with you on that. People of our age remember why we don't use paper straws anymore, because they're no good. You can barely use them for one drink, and they're not as green as the plastic straws. My daughter used the same plastic straw every day for 3 months. She rinsed it and she used it in her drinking water at nighttime for 3 months. It was as good as new. So just because something's called single use or thought of as single use doesn't mean we have to throw it away after one use.
So there is a certain amount of responsibility that comes back to us as an individual to say, well, just because it's plastic doesn't mean that I only have to use it once. I can use it repeatedly.
That's right. I mean, people don't really want the responsibility. They always want to blame something else. That's in human nature. The last thing we want to do is blame ourselves. We drive our car into a tree and blame the tree. Everyone does it, right? I'm not immune from that. But if we really want to make progress, we have to place the blame correctly so that we can find the right solutions.
So you say that a paper straw is actually more environmentally harmful than a plastic straw. Can you explain really the logic behind that statement?
Well, here's an interesting thing. If you start with trees, usually wood is greener than plastic, right? It's the only thing I found that's consistently greener than plastic. But to make paper, you have to grind the tree up into the fibers. It's an incredibly energy intensive process. You have to use a lot of water. You have to use a lot of chemicals and bleaching agents to make that paper straw. So by the time you've made that paper straw, it's used more CO2 and more energy and more chemicals than making the plastic straw. And you've also got a straw that weighs twice as much. So when that paper straw is done after one drink, it weighs 2 grams. The plastic straw can be used 100 times and it weighs 1 gram. It is far, far more beneficial to the environment to use a plastic straw. Or if you really care, don't take a straw. If you don't have special needs, nobody needs a straw, right? Just don't take one. It's as simple as that. I don't know what this obsession about straws is all about, because they really make no difference. If you look at the litter statistics, they're almost insignificant.
So when I go to the grocery store these days now, they ask me if I have my own bag, and if not, they're going to charge me a penny or two for a plastic bag. And I think, well, how fortunate for you that you're now able to charge for that bag that you used to give away for free. And I find that I keep those bags and I use them, well, I'm still using ones from last year. I've probably used them 30 or 40 times.
Right.
I was, led to believe that I'd be much better off using paper, but I find that the paper bag doesn't hold up the same. And in reading your book, I see that there's a whole bunch of other issues that basically say when you go to the supermarket and they ask you if you want paper or plastic, you're better off picking plastic. How come?
That's right. So one easy thing to do if you haven't got, first of all, life cycle analyses have been done on plastic bags. It's one of the most studied things I've ever found. So I found about 10 studies. They're all on my website. In Denmark, in Sweden, in Canada, more than one in America. Every life cycle analysis ever done says that paper is worse than plastic. It's absolutely clear, and cotton's far worse than plastic. There is no argument anywhere about it. So you should always pick the plastic bag because it's the best thing for the environment. Another thing you can do if you don't have a life cycle analysis in front of you is just weigh them. I've got a Kroger bag, which I showed to the kids at the elementary school yesterday. It weighs 60 grams. The Kroger plastic bag weighs 5.5 grams. That means whenever you take that paper bag, which is worse for the environment, you're generating 10 or 11 times more waste, which is absolutely preposterous. So you're right. People are charging us fines to use the greenest option. I mean, it's truly incredible that a company with the resources of Kroger are now banning, I heard, plastic bags. These companies are making decisions based on our wishes, but they didn't go away. Either they know what's really green. There is some evidence that the supermarkets actually know what is green, and they are forced to listen to us because we're the customers. Or it could just be that some of them are ignorant of the facts.
I find it ironic here in Canada. If you go to Fort McMurray, which is at the heart of the, in the heart of the oil sands, which is been labeled as dirty oil, you go into the supermarket there, they don't have any bags for you. You have to bring your own. Like they're so fully invested in the idea that plastic bags and even paper bags are an environmental toxin, and so they won't even give it to you. And yet this is in an environment that has been labeled as some of the dirtiest oil in the world.
Right. Strange, isn't it? I think part of it is these days there are no genuine problems. We've got a very easy life these days, and so people in today's society invent problems. That's my personal theory. It's the same on the Housewives of Orange County. You take a bunch of people with no real problems and too much money, and they invent their own dramas, right? So we're all trying to fight for what's green. We're worried about these straws and things that make no difference in the real world. I mean, cigarette litter is about 15 times higher than it is for straws, and it kills you as well, and no one talks about it, right? So we find something which is microscopic that makes us feel better about ourselves and obsess about it when it makes no difference and actually harms the environment.
One of the most interesting things that I read that really validates what you say in your book was about how the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, for example, have demonstrated that the lowest environmental impact for the printing of money is to use plastic money.
Right. In that case, paper and plastic come out pretty similar per bill, but the plastic note lasts about 3 times longer than the paper one. So these people in America don't realize that plastic banknotes have been around in the world since the 80s. They're standard currency in Australia, and several other countries have plastic notes because they're almost impossible to tear and they last a long time, and it's easier to put good counterfeiting measures into them. compared to paper. So there's a lot of plastic banknotes out there all around the world.
So one of the other elements that people say, yes, but okay, this may be the case, but once you put the plastic into a landfill or gets discarded somewhere else, it deteriorates at a rate that is so incredibly slow that it is pollution that will last for generations. Is there truth in that claim?
Well, it's a funny one. People don't realize that landfills are designed to trap carbon. We don't want things to decompose because they give off carbon dioxide and it leads to global warming. So landfills are designed so that nothing degrades. They've done archaeology on landfills, right? There's a book called Rubbish, ! And they literally dug down in landfills to find out what's in them, how much plastic is there, all the other stuff. And they found out you can pull out newspapers from 50 years ago. It's made of paper and you can still read it. You can pull out steaks and avocado and guacamole, and it looks like it was just put there last week, but it's really 10 or 20 years old because there's no oxygen in a landfill. It's designed to keep everything there without degradation. So this argument that environmentalists use that plastics won't degrade in a landfill is preposterous because an apple won't degrade in a landfill and neither will a newspaper. They're not supposed to degrade there.
In landfills, I understand there's all sorts of other biological matter that get in there and eat up anything that can be consumed.
At the surface, it does. Where there's oxygen at the surface, you can get some degradation, but underneath, pretty much nothing's happening. And if it were happening, it would be giving off, if it did happen, which we don't want it to, it would give off tons of CO2 and methane, which is 80 times more powerful as a global warming gas. So
yes,
landfills are designed to discourage degradation.
But still, back to the issue of plastics, do they degrade and at what rate?
Yes. So plastics are made of organic material. And to a layperson, that means apples are made of organic material. We're made of organic material. Anything with carbon is organic, right? And that's what plastics are made of too. So if you take a regular piece of plastic, they say that plastics last 1,000 years, right? And this is what triggered my response at school. They told my kids plastics last 1,000 years. And I know that that's just an outright lie. If you take a polyethylene bag and put it outdoors, it's gone and fragmented into dust in a year. And that's been done. Scientists have done that. So environmentalists are telling us plastics last 500 years or 1,000 years, and it's just rubbish. They've done the experiment and we know it's not true. In fact, plastics, unless you add stabilizers to protect them, just fall to pieces in front of your eyes. Polypropylene is another common plastic, and that will fall to pieces at room temperature in 1 year, less than 1 year. So the two most common plastics on the planet are both able to fall to pieces in less than a year, unless you specifically put in chemicals to protect them. That is how unstable they are. And yet these environmentalists are telling us that they last 1,000 years. I made a joke in my book. Go to Lowe's or Home Depot and ask for a piece of plastic with a 1,000-year guarantee, and they will laugh their socks off. Everybody knows in the real world that plastic doesn't last 1,000 years. My car bumper doesn't last 1,000 years. Nothing does. We know that. And yet somehow we believe it when the environmentalists tell us it's nonsense.
I want to go back to something that you just said. You said that plastics are an organic material. I thought that they were made mostly from oil-based products. Right.
So oil is organic. Oil's made from the decomposition of ancient tree life and stuff like that, vegetation. And so that was organic. And when it decomposes, it gives oil and coal, which are organic. And then when you make polymers from those or plastics, that's also organic material. It's carbon bonds holding everything together.
So when it comes to recycling glass, we touched on this earlier, that post-consumer glass I can mix. Post-consumer plastic poses some other problems. And how do we start to address some of those challenges?
Right. So the first thing to know is that recycling plastics fundamentally is very simple, right? You take a piece of plastic like a polyethylene bag and you stick it in a frying pan and you melt it and you make a new shape, right? It's easy. It's like remelting wax. So fundamentally, almost all plastic is recyclable. The trouble is when you mix them together, as you're alluding to, when you mix plastics together, they don't behave very well. They don't really mix in the molten state, right? So you end up with droplets of one inside another one, and you get a part with not very good mechanical properties. So that's a problem. A big thing is down to how well you can sort those plastics. You need to sort the polyethylene into one pile, the polypropylene into another pile, and the PET into another pile, and melt them together with each other, rather than just blending them. And that's a challenge, but it's a challenge which has been overcome in most countries. America's way behind on this. We only have about 9% recycling of plastics. In Europe, the number's 50% on average and up to 75% in some countries. So this is something which is easily done, and it is done, but America's chosen not to invest in the infrastructure to do it.
Well, I was at Globe 2020 a couple of weeks ago here in Vancouver and was looking at some of the innovations that are coming in the plastic sector. And it's clear that there are, I guess, polymers or identifiers, identifying molecules that are about to be added to plastics so that when they go into recycling, it makes it much easier to sort that and ensure that the plastics are then bundled together appropriately to make recycling easier. And so you go, I look at that and I think, okay, this is innovation at work. Do you see this being really viable so that we can take those post-consumer plastics and truly make them so that they re-enter and either complement or supplement a big part of the virgin plastic production?
Absolutely. Many regions use up to 50% or even more of recycled plastic. So it can be done, and it is being done on a huge scale all around the world, just not in America.
Well,
So
I
we're
understand in
behind that.
Brazil. I understand in Brazil they've been doing this for quite some time.
Right. And in Europe, as I said, the average is 50% and we're at 9%. So this is something I ask myself as a scientist. People will ask me something and I'll look around the world and say, is this done anywhere? Right? Is there anywhere that's made this work? And if the answer is yes, then you say, hey, there's no fundamental reason we can't be doing this because it's already been proven.
You have to share the story from your book where you talk about sitting on an airplane looking at the computer of the woman who's sitting next to you with the little sign. What was it? A world without plastic or something? Or what was she endeavoring to do?
Yeah, she was taking a nap and she had this sticker on her laptop and it said "Rise above plastics," right? And I thought it's so funny because the sticker was plastic, the adhesive was plastic, the laptop was plastic, and her shoes were plastic. They're made of nylon, right? Her backpack was a nylon backpack. She had on polyurethane insoles in her shoe, like the cushioning in your shoes was polyurethane. If I looked at the whole of her, the only thing I could see that wasn't plastic was a cotton jacket. And so it was just ironic. She's sitting there. She had been editing some footage shot on a plastic GoPro. She was editing it on her plastic laptop. It was just insane, right? Almost everything that made her life what it was made of plastic. And yet she had this silly sticker that said "Rise above plastics." And I thought, how naive, right? These people don't even realize they'd be living in a cave if it weren't for plastics.
Well, that shows how ubiquitous plastic is in our life.
Right.
It's everywhere. The wiring that is carrying the electronic signal from the camera to the computer for us to be able to conduct this interview couldn't happen without it being wrapped in a plastic sheathing, and that's just one example. And then there's
fresh water.
Yeah,
through plastic pipes. That's another big one.
Medical grade plastics. Plastic has become a big part of our lives, and so it seems like it's something easy to push back against. But if we push too hard and make the wrong decisions, the consequences could be quite severe.
Yeah. Well, I don't think everyone's sincere in their wish against plastic, right? There's a tendency of human beings to go with the mob, right? So everybody's out there virtue signaling. They're all shouting, "Let's down with plastics. Let's be good for the environment." But they don't really mean it. Nobody wants to give up their phone. Nobody wants to give up having electricity in their houses. Nobody wants to give up medicines and medical equipment and all of the other things that keep us alive, which are all made, or our cars, which are made of plastic. Nobody would give up any of that stuff. A lot of this is people out there virtue signaling, shouting to make themselves look like a good person, when in fact they have nothing against plastics at all. So there are some people who are truly against plastics, and if those people really were sincere in their beliefs, they'd be off living in a cave somewhere with no running water and no electricity. But these people are not living in a cave. They're typing on their plastic laptops telling us what great people they are and how they want to get rid of plastics. And I'm like, well, if that were true, you wouldn't be typing anything on the internet because you'd be sitting in a cave with a campfire in front of you.
So you went to your daughter's school and made a presentation. How was it received?
It was terrific. And I have to give credit to the teachers, right? Because I'm also telling them something which is the opposite of what they believe. So I really have a lot of respect for them for inviting in an external expert who's just spent a year reading hundreds of scientific articles to uncover the truth. And the children were fascinated. I gave one example, right? Because these are children, right? So there's less graphs and more cartoons and graphics. I had a picture of a guy who had driven his car into a tree, right? So there's a tree and there's the car and there's the guy. And I said, okay, who's to blame? Put your hand up if you think the tree is to blame for this accident. Nobody puts their hand up. And I said, put your hand up if you think the car drove itself into the tree. And a few kids put their hands up. And then I say, and who thinks it was the person's fault? And all the kids put their hands up. And I go, that's right. And it's the same with litter. people want to blame the car or the tree. It's human nature, but litter is caused by people. There are tons of studies to prove that, and there's no other explanation. It's all down to human behavior. Blaming a candy wrapper for jumping onto the floor, or if you think a PET bottle grew flippers and flew into the ocean and started swimming, then that's beyond naive. It's not productive.
You touch on one other thing in your book. You say the only thing that's worse than single use is zero use. What do you mean by that?
Well, everybody talks about single use, and it got me thinking. Something that really frustrates me is I get 1 or 2 pounds of litter delivered to my letterbox every day and to my driveway, right? They throw this local newspaper on there, which I never asked for. It's a giant thing. And then there's all of this spam, right? It's coming in my letterbox. It's brochures I never asked for. It's newspapers, it's flyers. All this stuff was never asked for, and it's zero use. It's pounds of it every day, and it goes directly in the trash can without ever being looked at. It's literally zero use. So if you look at waste, paper and cardboard is double the amount of plastic, right? So everyone's obsessed by single-use plastic, and what they should be obsessed by is zero-use paper. This is paper which is delivered to your door, and you throw it right in the trash can without even glancing at it, and it's double the amount of all the plastic waste. So, and no one's talking about it. It's like the world's biggest sleight of hand or deception. People are focused on straws that make no difference. They're focused on the wrong materials. They're focused on single use when they should be talking about zero use. And it kind of boggles my mind that people have missed what's truly important.
Well, I like your perspective. You're saying don't be wasteful. Don't use something if you don't need to. If you have it, reuse it where possible.
That's right.
That we as individuals play a role in protecting the environment. We have to protect this environment. It's the only home that we have. I think it was French President Macron who said there is no planet B. Yes, we have to look after Mother Nature. She's looked after us. We've got to look after her. But let's do so armed with the appropriate information. And that clearly seems to be what you're doing, but I sometimes wonder whether or not you're shouting into a wind tunnel.
You know what? I don't mind. If I've done my best, if I spent a year of my life, people criticize me sometimes. They're like, well, you're a plastics guy. You're going to defend plastics. And if you read the book, it's not a defense of plastics. It's a presentation of the facts. When plastics win or when they don't win. As I said, wood often comes out on top. But I don't mind, because I will have spent a year of my life reading hundreds of articles, and I will have made this book, and I would have made it available to everybody who cares. I'm going to make a video for school children to watch. I'm going to make sure that people who do care, and even if it's a minority, even if it's 2 or 3% or 5% of people who actually care enough to read the facts, I will have done my best and I'll feel good about it. I'm not naive enough to think I'm going to change everyone's mind. A lot of these people are, you know, they're just not interested in facts. They've decided that they're more righteous than everyone else, and they're going to do X, Y, and Z irrespective of the facts. But I do find it ironic that the people who think themselves most virtuous are too lazy to actually check the facts before they go and act. So that's the irony of it. Some of these people who are most passionate and feel that they're most virtuous are doing the most harm.
Well, we frequently make decisions to make us feel good, but we're unaware of the unintended consequences.
That's right. That's right. It's unfortunate, but that's human nature.
So for somebody who is interested, where can they get a copy of your book?
It's not available yet. It'll be out in about 2 or 3 weeks. It'll be on Amazon. And at some point, I'm going to make it available for free, because books are not about making money. Books are about getting information in front of people. And that's what especially this book is about. So at some point, I'm going to make it free for everybody, because it's about getting good information in front of people and making a difference. It's not about selling books.
Well, thank you for clearing up some of my misunderstanding about plastic, because I have to admit that I started thinking, okay, anything I can do to move away from plastics, I'm willing to do so. Not that I'm necessarily going to go rush out and say, good, now I can do whatever I want with plastic. No, responsible use is still important, but it's valuable to know that if somebody decides that they're going to sneer at me for using plastic, I can say to them, well, you better check your facts before you get too virtuous about this.
Exactly. I say every time I go to Kroger, they say paper or plastic, and I say plastic, please. It's better for the environment. Unfortunately, Kroger are banning plastic bags, and I can't get in touch with their CEO, or I'd show him these 10 life cycle analyses proving that he's making the wrong choice.
I'm not familiar with who that company is because they're not here in Vancouver, but I'm gathering they're a grocery store
That's right.
chain.
Big supermarket chain. Exactly.
Well,
There's one other thing I'd like to say.
Yeah.
Well, people have a hard time believing that litter is not caused by people. And I give some examples in the book. And the most powerful one is this, right? They print a lot of plastic banknotes per year, about 8 billion per year. So that's one for every person in the world per year printed in plastic. How many do you see when you go on holiday? How many do you see washing up on the beaches? How many plastic banknotes do you find jamming up our rivers? If you go for a walk, do you find these plastic banknotes in front of you? There's one printed per person per year for the last 30 years, and I've never seen one in my whole life. So this is a piece of plastic that's extremely small, easy to lose, and I've never seen one in my whole life as litter. And that is a proof that it's people that cause litter, not plastics. It's the same with credit cards. Every American has 2.5 credit cards. I've never seen one in my whole life on the ground because it's small, it's plastic, it's easy to lose. And surprise, when it's worth something, nobody loses them. And that's another proof that plastic is not causing litter, it's people.
Well, you drop a banknote, it's not going to stay there for very long. Somebody else is going to pick it up.
That's right.
And same with the credit card. Yeah, I have found both on the ground and I picked them up.
That's right. I call it self-tidying plastic.
Yeah. Well, maybe that is the answer, that we give a greater value to that garbage, but then we drive up the cost of use. It's a very, very tricky balance to find, but it's a valid point to say when money's made out of plastic, it's not going into the litter cycle.
Well, in Norway, they do put a use on it. They have a deposit scheme for their plastic bottles, their PET bottles. They have a small deposit. They get 97% return, and each bottle is recycled 12 times. So yes. Your idea is exactly right. Fines are the wrong idea. Bans are the wrong idea. But putting a value on that piece of plastic means that you get them all back. You can recycle them, and the whole system works. And that's proven in Germany and in Norway.
And here in British Columbia as well. Credit to the regulators here who foresaw a number of years ago that you put a value on that, it gets recycled. And it may not get recycled by the person who first uses it, but there are other people who can then look at that plastic and say there's value to it. I'm going to pick it up and put it back into the stream,
exactly.
the recycling stream. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, that really works.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, you. I appreciate your time.